Welcome to Everything is Everything. I'm Amit and this is my good friend Ajay. I'm not sure if this is my good friend Ajay. Bearded economists look alike to me. Are you Ajay Shah? Prove to me that you're Ajay Shah. Kaagaz Dikhaao.
I don't have papers. Will you recognize my face? FRT, face recognition technology.
Biometrics. Take off your glasses, I'll scan your eyes. Yes, pass. You're Ajay Shah. Well
Okay,
done.
can we record an episode now?
Let's record an episode right now. Welcome to Everything is Everything. I'm Amit allegedly and this is my good friend Ajay Shah. So, Ajay, although this is not an episode where we tell a story that could be a film, I will tell you now a story that could be a film. In fact, I see our good friend, the handsome Vaishnav Vyas, as someone who could potentially play the role of Lal Bihari. Right? Let me tell you about Lal Bihari. In the village of Azamgarh, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, in 1951, a young lad called Lal Bihari was born. Though I shouldn't say a young lad called Lal Bihari was born because he wasn't born a young lad. He was born a baby and then he became a young lad with the years. Note the year 1951. Right? And he grows up and he's playing in the fields and his cousins are his friends and etc. Everything is going well and he has land. And this is where the problem begins because in 1976, his cousins decide that we have to harap this man's land, right? He is not worthy. And therefore, they declare him dead. There's a death certificate which is produced, bribes are paid, he's declared dead, and because he's dead, his relatives get the land, the cousins get the land. So Lal Bihari, at the age of 25, when you would think his life is beginning, he finds his life has actually officially ended, right? He is technically dead. What is he to do? Now, this is a matter of great perturbation, but the point is that if he is dead on the official records, he could also become alive on the official records. How does he do this? So first, he organizes his own funeral and applies for compensation for his alleged widow, right? This doesn't work. Then he throws stones at a police station, hoping that he'll get arrested. Because if they arrest him, they have to concede he exists.
His personhood is assured.
His personhood is assured. Now, imagine the police. They have obviously been bribed by these cousins to declare him dead. Now, stones are being thrown at them, but they can't arrest the guy because if they arrest the guy, they lose. So, whatever. So, the police, for the first time in recorded Indian history, Ajay Shah, take a Gandhian view of the situation and ignore the stones. This doesn't work. What does he then do? He kidnaps one of his young cousins who's 10 years old, right? He assumes the parents, the uncles and the aunts, they'll all come for the cousin and they'll sort it out, right? So, he kidnaps the kid and goes away with the kid. But here is the thing, Ajay Shah. India's population is awesome. There are many kids in that family. No one gives a shit, right? So after 10 days, he decides that what the fuck am I doing spending time with this kid? I like the kid anyway. He gives the kid ice cream and he sends the kid back, right? And you would think at this point, he will give up and be reconciled to being dead. Like you and I talk about, this great human struggle to come to terms with our own mortality. But imagine coming to terms with your own death, which has allegedly already happened and you're still alive. But he continues through the 80s. In 1988, in Allahabad, he stands for elections against VP Singh. Because he's saying if my name is on the electoral rolls, I have to say I'm alive. He loses his deposit and, that name doesn't count for anything. In 1989, he stands against Rajiv Gandhi in Amethi, right? So you hear all these stories, so many candidates lost their deposit, independents are standing. Behind each such independent person, Ajay Shah, there is a story rich in life, rich in drama, rich in pathos, rich in cinematic potential. Are you listening, Vaishnav Vyas? So, so this is the story up till this point. And in 1994, I am pleased to tell you, something unusual happens. He wins and he is declared alive again. Right? But by this time, through the 80s, what he did was, he changed his name to Lal Bihari Mritak. That's how he was known, Mritak meaning dead. And he created something called the Uttar Pradesh Mritak Sangh. And the Uttar Pradesh Mritak Sangh was a body, and pun not intended. The Uttar Pradesh Mritak Sangh was an organization which had 20,000 members. And out of those 20,000 members, I ask you, Ajay Shah, to guess how many of them managed to be alive again. Like these were all people who had been declared dead for various reasons. 20,000 people. How many of them came back into the living? 4 people.
That's how hard it is.
That's how hard it is.
Gentle reader, on this pleasant business of being alive and being dead and being able to demonstrate your own activity, we are in the sad subject of know your customer. Okay, so if you've lived in India for any length of time, you have been tormented with know your customer problems. My bank complains to me every year that I have to come and prove once again that I am the person that I once said that I was with them,
And which
and
you have proved many times in the
which I've
past
proved
year.
before, but like proofs have the depreciation and they vanish with time, so it has to be re-upped. All over the country, there are many bad stories about bank accounts getting frozen. These are bank accounts that contain money, and the people with the money are just expropriated because something has gone wrong with your KYC. And look, okay, it's one thing for you or I to deal with the paperwork, the Aadhaar number, and be able to speak to the bank. And when the need arises, you can march up to the bank manager and appeal to some common sense. But for most people in the country, this is just a living nightmare that all kinds of people in India go through misery when trying to engage with the official systems. And this is just one big mess. So today, let's take a first principles look at what is this, where did it come from, why is it here, and why is most of this a profound error vis-a-vis the fundamental principles of liberal philosophy and the concept of a constitutional democracy. And interestingly, there are mistakes in this framework all over the world, but of course the Indian version of this is way worse than what is found everywhere else in the world.
And I want to double score what you just said about how we, the elite privileged, can somehow find a way to, maneuver this, but most people simply can't, right? And Harsh Vardhan, your good friend, was on my show. He's a very senior person in the banking industry. People respect his wisdom a lot. He's on the boards of organizations, etc., etc. Basically, he knows the people who run the banks. And he told me about what a nightmare it was for him to get his KYC sorted out, that you make phone calls here, you make phone calls there. I know another friend, incredibly smart, in her 40s, who had like a supplementary credit card attached to her husband's credit card, and she lost that because she had to give KYC and she just couldn't figure out the maze of paperwork involved. And she'd already done it the previous year, but she couldn't do it this time in time, and she just lost a credit card, which was a supplementary card to her husband who still has it. So it was just anal. And how old people do this. Like, I remember my father in his last years was just bumbling and fumbling and completely unable to deal with this. And it was cruelty to expect a man of advancing years or a woman of advancing years to deal with all of this. So this is just a huge problem.
I have one insight around what you have just described, and this actually links to our episode around the journey of Indian finance. We're running a central planning system that caters to the interests of the officials in the administrative state who operate this system. And they keep on layering more and more rules and procedures. And there's a smaller and smaller set of people for whom Indian finance works. For a very large number of people, you look at these systems and procedures and you say, okay, it's not for me. And people just then get on with their lives of cash and gold and real estate and like keep away from the formal systems. While on this subject, we should recall the interesting stories from the United States in the 1930s. And the gangster Al Capone had this concept of taking cash into a business with cash income, namely laundromats. In America, laundromats are shops where you go with your pile of clothes, stick them into a machine, and you take your washed clothes back. And so income would be shown as the money belonging to the laundromat, and that's how the word money laundering emerged. And we are all in this mess because governments want to go block this kind of money laundering, and every time you see the enforcement directorate in the newspapers, this is the problem that is going on.
So Ajay, to quote from one of your favorite films, let's start at the very beginning.
Very well. The beginning here is fundamental principles. Okay, so a lot of attention and discussion in India in this field has been on that last mile of this regulation and that regulation. And this misses the essence of it. So I want to go to fundamentals. And dear viewers, dear readers, I want to acknowledge that this episode of Everything is Everything is built with the intellectual guidance and support of Bhargavi Zaveri.
A very fine thinker who's also been on the scene and the unseen. So, do check that out.
Okay, let's get going. I want to start at the fundamental question. What is the case for financial privacy? Okay, so in the modern world of populism, there is a very comfortable notion that, oh, financial activities, they should be surveilled. Okay, and I want to pause and question that. And I want to read financial privacy into fundamental personal privacy. Okay, so let's go step by step. What is surveillance of a person? You find out what conversations they have, the things they do in the day, what kind of things they buy, and so on. Okay, so that is getting a picture of a person. You could put a spy to go after a person and try to derive all kinds of information about what that person is up to in her life. And we know that this is not on. Surveillance is not permissible in a liberal democracy, and this must not be done. Very well, imagine I give you the complete picture of Amit Varma's financial activities. So I know everything that you buy and sell. This is in fact incredibly intrusive. You will glean a lot of information about the person by being able to look inside their every financial detail. So the simple proposition I want to put up is that if you believe in personal privacy, you should equally believe in financial privacy. That just like nobody, not the Indian state, should be able to see my daily life in any kind of detail. In exactly the same fashion, nobody, not the Indian state, should be able to see my financial life because it is deeply personal, it is private. Too much can be gleaned and inferred about my life by looking at my financial life. You will get the argument, oh, but if you have nothing to hide, why do you want secrecy? But this is well known, well understood in the entire field of privacy, that everybody needs privacy. Everybody should desire and be able to obtain complete privacy of their lives. A world in which you do not have privacy is not freedom. Okay, because there's a chilling effect. Once you know you're being observed, you're in the panopticon, then every day your behavior, your activities are distorted out of deference to the watcher. And that is a terrible life to live in. Freedom is the world of not being observed. It is essential to have your own privacy, to have your own secrecy in order to be free. And that applies equally into financial privacy. Nobody should be able to see your financial data, and so financial privacy is fundamental. Let's go one step further into a firm. Okay, in modern populism, it is a very comfortable idea that, okay, fine, maybe the people deserve privacy, but firms, no. Once you become a company, now you have no right to any kind of privacy. And all kinds of people, all kinds of governments can merrily go into the firm and demand all kinds of disclosures, release all kinds of information into the public, and so on. And again, this is not correct. This is not a good way to approach a firm. So I want to give you a trivial example. Imagine you know the database of the customers and the vendors of a firm. You could destroy the firm by giving this information to their competitors, or a concerted attack by powerful people or the government to interfere with the employees, with the customers, with the vendors, could torpedo the working of a firm, and that would destroy the firm. It's like a death sentence to have the violation of the financial privacy of a firm. And just in the financial statements of a firm, you can excavate who are all the parties with which this firm is doing business, and that could be very damaging to the life of a business. Okay? So there is a very good case for financial privacy of firms. We should not say, oh, because you're a firm, you're some capitalist, you're some big person, now suddenly your claim to privacy is gone, which is a feature of modern populism. I want to link this to freedom of association. Freedom of association is our ability to create clubs, associations, political parties, non-government organizations, anything at our free will. This is a fundamental constitutional right in every liberal democracy. Very well, if you don't have financial privacy, then powerful people will be able to mess with the funders and supporters of every non-profit organization. So to demand intrusions into the financial privacy in terms of detailed reporting requirements for any organization is a violation of freedom of association. So if you take the concept, the constitutional right of freedom of association, we can make a club, we can make a non-profit organization, we can make a for-profit organization. The right to associate is fundamental in liberal democracy. Very well, the right to associate then goes with the right to financial privacy. That if you will shatter financial privacy, you have shattered right to association. So if you think of the intimate connection to all the other parts of liberal democracy, freedom of speech, blah, 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 they all flow from the right to association. And financial privacy undergirds the right to association. So I'm just hoping to say to all of us that we should take financial privacy very seriously. It's not a small matter. That secrets are very important. Financial secrets are very important. Every natural person, every firm has every right in a sane liberal democracy to keep their secrets.
I want to underscore this with a couple of points here. And one point is, just as you often make the argument that when we think of the role of the state, freedom should be the default, and then any intrusions on that have to be well argued. Similarly, it is a case all over the developed world that when it comes to policing, privacy is the default, right? I've recently been watching a lot of Chicago PD, a show that started off very middling but has become really good in its later seasons. One of the things that you will find in all of these different series is that if you're going to tap somebody's phone, you got to go to a judge, you got to apply for permission. There is a high bar of evidence. You can't just do it. You can't just say, this is a suspicious person, I think so. There is a high bar of evidence to be able to do that. There are institutions, there are safeguards, there are processes. You want to search someone's house, you need a warrant. There is a reason for that. It is not a mere formality. There is a reason that these are separate institutions. One guy decides to raid, but the other guy gives a permission for it after looking at the evidence. And there's a reason all of this has evolved, where just as freedom should be the default, privacy should be the default, and any invasion of it has to be superbly well argued. The other point I would like to make is about the value of privacy itself. I did a great episode with Rahul Mathan, who's written a book on privacy, in fact, and through that I sort of discovered a lot of the history of privacy, and part of what I discovered is that we take privacy for granted today, but privacy wasn't always available to us. When you lived in hunter-gatherer tribes, everybody's in close proximity, everybody can hear everybody else, that is your life. There is no interior life there. Everything that you do is observed by everyone else. And then gradually, as you go through human history, walls are a fantastic technology. And even in early settlements, you see really thin walls where you can hear what's happening next door. But gradually, you have thicker walls. You have the separation of houses. You have separate bedrooms for people. People are alone and unobserved for periods of time. And what does this do? What this does is that it helps them create a rich interior life. That there is a part of their existence which is not being watched by everyone in a panopticon, as you point out. It's not being watched by everyone, where they can be themselves, they can be creative, ideas can come, they can try new things, they can go against conventions, they can challenge existing wisdom, right? So in a sense, all of the great progress of humanity depends in a fundamental way upon this interior life of individuals, which is enabled certainly by the company of others, but also largely by solitude, by just sitting down and thinking, by being alone. And you're not alone if you know you're being watched. So this is a truly fundamental issue, privacy. It is not some minor thing, oh, if you have nothing to hide, why do you care? It is not about having nothing to hide, right? And secondly, everybody who says this, if you have nothing to hide, why care? I will challenge them to, make this Google search results public. What do you do in the Chrome incognito window? Dunia ko dikha do, to samajh jayenge. Everybody has a private life, boss.
Yeah. You brought up the processes that are used in advanced economies around the police, the law enforcement agencies, and the access to information. And you said it precisely correct. Step one, just because a cop says, I want to put a phone tap on somebody, that doesn't mean you get through. You have to stand in front of a judge and prove that I have prima facie evidence. Only after that, only the judge can authorize the wiretaps. Wiretaps are for a finite amount of time. Further, the phone company does not store my past SMS and my past phone calls. So a wiretap can only be initiated on a prospective basis. Okay, all these concepts are pitch perfect, and they should be brought to financial privacy, i.e., that each of us should have the ability to establish a deletion window with the bank or the financial firm, where I should be able to say that any transaction more than 3 days old, please delete it. So the bank has no information about me. When the policeman wants to investigate me, they should have to go to a judge and get a warrant. And then after that, they get some finite time surveillance rights to look at my life. And then that time ends and it can only be authorized by a judge. There's an exact analogy between personal privacy and financial privacy. Similarly, there is a great principle in the world of privacy, which is that there cannot exist any mass surveillance system. Okay, implicit in what you've described is that a cop cannot say, I want to monitor everybody's phone and I'll put some AI and I want to listen to conversations involving terrorism. So I'll put in a speech recognition, and if they say bomb and hand grenade, then I want to know which is the call that is doing that. This is very tempting to policemen, but it is only in a police state that a policeman's job is easy. We must make their life difficult. So in every liberal democracy, there are no mass surveillance systems. This is fundamental. And in the same fashion, there should be no mass surveillance system in finance. And what is happening in the world is deeply problematic.
And what is also fundamental is, that old saw of power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The point is not just about what we do when our privacy has been encroached. The point is when you give the state this much power, what does the state do with that power? It will crack down on dissent. It will crack down on political opponents. That if you're the party in power and somebody is making a donation to your opposition party, you can do a tax raid on them. You can, you can figure out where to hurt them, in what way to hurt them. And this is just unacceptable. And it is, this reality about the state that we must understand. So Ajay, tell me the backstory of all this. Where does all of this begin? That these onerous requirements come in, KYC comes in. What are the origins of it?
So let's go back into history and understand how banks thought about secrecy around their customers' information. So in the good old days, banks naturally gave customers privacy because all customers crave privacy. And that was the norm. That was an informal code about how banks operated. A very big turning point is in 1933 when Hitler came to power in Nazi Germany. They passed a law demanding disclosure by every German citizen of their overseas assets. Sounds familiar? Okay, that kind of Nazi thing is being done by governments all over the world today. Okay, and this was the first. Like, this had never been done before. That asking every citizen for what do you own outside this country. This was not what states did, and
it was no business of the states.
Yeah, we have normalized oppression in the modern world, and this was very perturbing to the banks in Switzerland. Switzerland was the banking capital of the world, and at the time, the political system felt that we cannot count on good sense and the informal codes of banks to protect the privacy of the people and of our foreign customers. We are serving our foreign customers. If any foreign customer starts feeling that we are piercing their secrets, then the place of Switzerland as a banking capital will be damaged. So in response to the Nazis, the Swiss government passed the first laws saying that no bank will ever divulge information about its customers except when ordered by a judge in Switzerland, who can only be processing crimes under Swiss law. So if you have committed a crime in Germany and there is a German prosecutor here, we will disregard you. We don't care. Okay, so look at the glory of this, that if there is a local police processing a crime in Switzerland, then the judge and only the judge can order the bank to reveal information. Other than that, there's no way you'll ever get information out of a Swiss bank. Okay, so this is the beginning, and this is the way in which the old world of banking privacy came about, and I would argue that this is a very healthy world.
So Ajay, fine, Hitler came, Hitler was an aberration, and he did this thing which is now normalized throughout the world, but the Swiss banks were there, and what Hitler did wasn't yet the rule across the world. What went wrong? What happened?
So these things were indeed an aberration, and then we got back to normal levels of safety and secrecy, that if you're a natural person anywhere in the world, you face the political upheavals and the authoritarian governments of the 20th century, you go hide your wealth in a place like Switzerland and you get your safety. Okay, and I consider this a very healthy and sensible world, as opposed to a lot of the modern noises that are made about Swiss banks and tax havens and all that. the people doing this are just doing populism and they don't understand the 20th century. Okay, to understand the 20th century is to see that these are the ways by which people protected themselves against governments. And the entire nightmare of the 20th century involved people fleeing from governments and creating a private life, a personal life, and that involved things like a bank in Switzerland. So this was a good way to begin. Things started changing in the United States, and it is really a blot on the conscience of the United States, all the things that I'm going to describe to you. We often look to the United States for leadership in ideas and philosophy, but this story I'm going to tell is just a huge fail by the American intellectual community and the American state. So this started at the IRS, that the income tax people first in the 70s started creating requirements that banks have to watch out for large transactions and report these to the IRS. And this is an intrusion into financial privacy. So if you did more than $10,000 of a transaction in the 1970s, which is a big chunk of money today, then banks were obliged to give this information to the IRS. And at the time, people thought that, oh, but we are only going after tax evaders, so this is okay. So nobody spoke up and the slippery slope began. And then it started getting worse and it started getting worse. Then came Richard Nixon's war on drugs. And around the war on drugs, a whole new concept of financial crime enforcement began, which is called anti-money laundering. So here the philosophy was that they created a concept of a predicate offense and money laundering, that I am supposed to be doing some drug trafficking and you may not even have established it, but associated with that investigation, you start thinking, are there things going on to convert criminal proceeds into legitimate resources through the banking system? And that's called the crime of money laundering. And a whole new wave of restrictive actions came up, and with it came surveillance. Around this was built an international body which is called FATF, Financial Action Task Force. Okay, all very Orwellian names. And the United States had one of the most Orwellian names for this law that I described around banking. They call it the Banking Privacy Act. It is actually the Destruction of Privacy in Banking Act. But the name should always be treated with skepticisms, that what governments do is very often inimical to what is good for the people, and things are cloaked in fancy names. The FATF is a club of the major countries of the world, and they created a concept that it was a closed club. There's only a handful of countries in the FATF, and India is the last member of the FATF. After this, I believe no other countries have been accepted into the FATF. And every other country suffers from more burden, more pain, more procedure. So then the trade-off that was given to countries is, look, either you can sign on to a bad world of financial surveillance, or you will face greater friction in the world. And many people took that trade-off and said, okay, fine, we'll go into FATF. And everything here got way, way worse after the 9/11 attacks, when the US Treasury championed AML-CFT, anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terror, where they came up with the wrong idea that in order to investigate terrorist plots, you have to find that $100,000 wired by a Pakistani Major General to Muhammad Atta, who did the work of organizing the 9/11 attacks. Now, this is not a very bright idea, because you set up a financial surveillance system covering 7 billion people, and the terrorists will just move their activities to other mechanisms. Okay, so I have frequently used a counter example that I seem to remember one 555 cigarette box packed with diamonds is $100,000. So you're done. You want to move $100,000 to Muhammad Atta, you just have to carry one cigarette case. And it contains diamonds, so it's invisible to X-ray machines. One should think about X-ray diffraction by diamonds. I wonder how modern machines would see it. Sorry, I digress. For all practical purposes, any self-respecting terrorist will find ways around this. And you've just dumped the entire world with this pain of handling KYC and procedural constraints, and the adverse impact on liberal democracy that comes from piercing the veil of secrecy of each of us and going after our financial information. I have a good friend who is an official who got private, quiet conversations with Russian officials who were telling this Indian official with a great sense of wonder that, did you know the American Treasury is teaching us how to oppress our own people? Because the American Treasury, the US Treasury, taught the Russian government on how to build a mass surveillance system in finance. They didn't know how to do it by themselves. This is the nonsense that emanated in the world originally through Banking Secrecy Act of the United States, and then anti-money laundering, and then the 9/11 attacks. It is well known by now that actually it had no value in terms of disrupting terrorism. So by now there are many articles that have been written that this stuff hasn't helped in disrupting any terrorist plots. It has just fouled up the machine of finance all over the world, and it has been very convenient for governments to obtain more information about their subjects.
So I just want to make a couple of points here to kind of underscore what you have said again. And one of them is that something terrible has happened. There's a terrorist attack. 9/11 has happened. And if you just identify the root cause came from bad state action, poorly thought out state action. That when the Russians go to Afghanistan, the Americans say, hey, let's build an army of guerrillas to fight them. And Osama bin Laden and his group Al-Qaeda come about as a direct consequence of that. So it was the meddling by the state that led to that mess up in the first place. But the second bigger point is that whenever things like this happen, the state will go in there with an attitude of, as famously expressed in Yes Minister, with an attitude of that we must do something, this is something, let's do it, right? It's extremely reactive. The great Bruce Schneier had, coined this term security theater. Right, that you think there is security, but as theater, there isn't really security. You will see this on flights with people taking off their belts and their shoes and all of that. You see it when we enter a mall in India, when they make you open the boot of your car and they put that thing inside. And if there's a suitcase in the boot of the car, they're not going to open the suitcase. It's just theater that they just want to open it, Like half the time I go in, the guy is waving the metal detector around my body and it's beeping madly. And, no questions, nothing. Yeah, just go through. So everybody knows that it is a facade. And what it does is that it doesn't solve the problem of terrorism, because any smart terrorism is going to do it some other way. For example, I came across this old news about how terrorists were planning to pack bombs in breast implants and send female suicide bombers with, exploding breast implants. Now, what are you going to do about that, right? You're not going to say, take out your breast implants and put them on the security tray, as the case might be. If you look at what Israel just did with exploding pagers or whatever, if you are smart enough, you'll always figure out a way. So you're not going to stop the terrorists. What all of this does is make life hard for us. What all of it does is, create state legibility, to play on, James C. Scott's term, where the state can suddenly see into the lives of the people. And it should be the other way around. The state, it should be our servant. It should be transparent to us and not the other way around.
There, I just want to distinguish between two things. You correctly describe the farce at airports as security theater. In financial surveillance, there is actually a different public choice theory angle, that the state gets to rattle the cage of the people saying, oh, terrorists. And in the bargain, the state grabs state legibility. So they grab power over the people under the excuse of terrorism. So there, it's a public choice theory argument that the state craves more information, more knowledge, more power over the people. And you always use security threats as an excuse to harm the working of liberal democracy. So there's this fundamental authoritarian slide that arises around these kinds of events.
And I also want to say that the debate is often framed as security versus freedom. That there's a trade-off between security and freedom. And now, okay, you give up some of your freedoms, you got to be secure. Did you see the terrorist attacks? But the point is that when we give those freedoms away, it affects our security against the state. Who's going to protect us from the state? That is the danger. So actually, we lose both. When we lose our freedom and we lose our security.
Or as a great man said, those who will sacrifice security in exchange for freedom will end up with neither security nor freedom.
So Ajay, let's talk about India. This is a great sort of quick potted history of the evolution of, state legibility increasing in our financial matters and all of that. What does this have to do with KYC?
So this is the backstory about how India got to the FATF. And while I disagree with the FATF in an advanced economy context, I will say that if you go to London or Zurich or Washington DC and open a bank account, your level of misery is low. Okay, so their procedures are sane and sensible, and there is a common sense around what they're doing. While I disagree with what they're doing, because it should be my birthright as a person to block all information flows about my financial activities from the state. Okay, they're not there, but they managed to work it out in a commonsensical way, where whether for reasons of tax evasion or for reasons of terrorism, they are watching transactions in a commonsensical way, which does not create a great amount of friction. Okay, so you could think intuitively, it's like having a security procedure at the airport, which is not so bad, meaning it may be stupid, but it's not so bad. When you take these kinds of compulsions and you bring them into India and you hand it to the Indian officialdom, it just creates the worst possible outcome. In the Indian bureaucracy, people are like soldier when it comes to security. So there is no common sense around security. People are humorless around security, and there's a cover your ass. So something has to be done as per FATF guidelines. Its most harsh and conservative version will be done in India in the rules. Then it will filter to RBI, which will make something worse out of it. Then it will filter to a bank, and the officials of the bank will make something worse out of it. And the frontline employee of the bank will interpret it in the worst possible way. Because each person is saying, I have no accountability. I am under no pressure to cater to the health and freedom and happiness and prosperity of the people of India. My only objective is to cover my ass. So each one comes up with a harder and crazier version of it. So we in India have ended up with the world's worst procedures around these things. So you look around the world, there are FATF members, equally like India, there are FATF members who do a damn decent job of a basic kind of surveillance system where certain kind of information is obtained. In India, it's the worst. So, all the nonsense that you see is the Indian bureaucracy, is the failures of the Indian state. It is, everything written about in Kelkar and Shah multiplied by the FATF, generating just an array of bad behavior by the Indian state. And there is an everyday oppression, and all of us just roll our eyes and get miserable and put up one sentence on Twitter and let it go. Because we just live with it day after day, and we've normalized this. We're no longer rattling the cage. We've given up. We just accept this kind of nonsense. As you correctly said at the beginning, the worst footprint of this happens for poor people, because poor people don't have the time and trouble and the ability to deal with all this complexity and overcome it. So you start getting financial exclusion, that poor people, small firms, they just look at all this and they give up. So, that's part of the great crisis of Indian small business. It's just one after another, the Indian state has created structures that work only for the large firms. It has become harder and harder to be a 5-man, 10-man, 20-man, 40-man firm in India. It is just too much friction. There's too much overhead. And the Indian state creates a world where you can't operate small firms. You can only be big firms in India. And then we came to a technological solutionism. People in the field of finance, myself included, had the wrong idea. Okay, I am guilty. I'm part of this thought process. And in hindsight, I realized how wrong it was. We looked for a technological fix. So we said, oh, there is all this KYC nonsense. Aadhaar. We will have a UID AI, and that will solve our problem. It will give us an end run around this. And now that I'm old and wise, I know you should never do this. You should never accept bad institutions and say that we'll do some technological cover up and somehow we will make do with an underlying foundation. And so Aadhaar has come. It is all over this place. And the KYC nightmare has not ended. The AML CFT nightmare has not ended. The Enforcement Directorate continues to walk around the streets of India doing all kinds of things and so on. So there are no technological fixes to these things. You have to go to the root cause. You have to go to fundamentals of liberal democracy and locate financial privacy alongside privacy in the Puttaswamy ruling, in the right to association, turn down mass surveillance systems and turn down the mass surveillance system in finance.
So Ajay, I have a question for you, which is that why isn't Aadhaar actually the solution? Like, there are many problems with it. We've discussed it. We have an episode on digital public infrastructure. But wouldn't it help if everyone who asks for KYC actually settles for the Aadhaar? Because the Aadhaar is the KYC, right? So why don't they just settle for the Aadhaar? Why doesn't that solve everything?
I want to propose a general law. Adding CPUs to a malfunctioning Indian government never makes the Indian government better. Okay, CPUs are never the answer. You have to go deep inside and solve the organization. So here we are. We have Aadhaar, and the bank says to me, no, you have to do your KYC afresh every year. So it isn't like good sense came because you added some CPUs. The malfunctioning Indian state is a malfunctioning Indian state. So all the problems of the enforcement directorate, they stand.
But my question is, isn't it easy for a central directive to simply come and say that Aadhaar suffices for KYC?
You're looking for one more central power and central directive solution. And that's where we began. That was what it was supposed to be. There was supposed to be an Aadhaar, and this problem was just supposed to mysteriously vanish because my iris scan does not change through my life. But I'm offering a meta law that when government malfunctions, you will never solve it using technology. You have to go to the root cause. You have to fix these government organizations. And it is all the hard work of humanities and liberal arts that will solve the failures of the Indian state. And so I say proof by counter example. Here we are standing in 2024. The first Aadhaar number was given out in 2009. Has the KYC nightmare in India ended? Has the AML CFT nightmare in India ended? No, it did not. So I mean, anybody who thinks that these technological fixes will solve a malfunctioning Indian state is wrong.
No, I agree with you entirely. But in the spirit of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, I would say that yes, of course, the ideal solution is if the state is not oppressive and if KYC doesn't exist in this form and is not required at all, etc., the panopticon disappears. I entirely agree with that. But given that it exists, surely one fix is simply a directive, a commonsensical directive, which says that don't bother the poor citizen for KYC every freaking year. Take the Aadhaar one time and that's it, you're done.
But you are coming up against the fundamental public choice theory problems of all the Indian orgs. All the Indian government orgs are manned with officials who want to cover their ass, who will come up with one more rule, one more procedure because they want to be safe and they don't care about the interests of the people of India. So they will keep coming up with one more rule and one more rule. So the idea that good sense will prevail is the flaw. And if good sense will prevail, very well, go to the root cause. So trying to find an end run around problems of public administration with a technological silver bullet, that is the core flaw.
If there were no asses, there would be nothing to cover. So Ajay, how do we think about a broad solution, not just in the sense of India itself, where as you pointed out that it just got worse and worse as you go one level down, each level down to the last mile, where everybody, covers their ass and interprets the law in the most oppressive possible manner. But overall, when we, look at the overall issue of financial surveillance and privacy on a global basis, what do you think a good future looks like where we manage to solve this?
The good future is one where first I want to talk about KYC and financial privacy, and then I want to generalize. We have to see the connections between personal privacy, the Puttaswamy ruling, the right to association, mass surveillance systems, and financial privacy. So we need to use constitutional law and the courts to shut down all mass surveillance in finance. The individual should have the ability to go into a web browser and say to a bank that I want you to delete all my transactions 1 millisecond after they take place so that I get privacy. Okay? And the LEAs should be obliged to go get a warrant through something akin to a United States FISA court and initiate a finite time surveillance once they've proved that somebody is a drug dealer. And then for 90 days, they get to see their financial transactions. So that's the healthy future we should go into. But there is one more general lesson in here that we should think a lot about. This is from Land Pritchett, but also it's a deep idea flowing all around modern sensible development theory, growth theory. It is also there in Kelkar and Shah. It is the idea that be skeptical about global best practice. That any naive transplantation of something that seems to work well in the United States should never be brought into India because there is so much other invisible infrastructure. There is invisible infrastructure in the form of liberal democracy, checks and balances, courts, communities, norms. All that is what undergirds the de facto state of protection and privacy in the United States. And it was truly wrong and dangerous and evil of the United States Treasury to go pushing this all over the world, and it was stupid in India to accept this. Okay, Amit, we're at the end of this show. Do you have any recommendations? Either just fun stuff, tell us your song of the day, or tell us things that are more directly connected to this theme.
Well, song of the day connected to surveillance. Every breath you take by the police, every breath you take, I'll be watching you, Ajay Shah. Watch out, I'll be watching your transactions. And as far as the film is concerned, it's a film I vaguely remember having recommended on a previous episode of Everything is Everything, but it fits so well here. Why not? It's a film called The Lives of Others by Florian Henkel von Donnersbach. And this was a debut film, and it's about surveillance. It's about East Germany, West Germany. I don't want to give much away. I just want to say it's a masterpiece. And I think of it as just one of the greatest debut films by a director that I have ever seen, up there with Pather Panchali by Satyajit Ray or Court by Chaitanya Tamhane, just a film in that class. And it is about watching and being watched and how actually it can, change both sides. So I don't think the Indian state is really going to get reformed because they're watching us.
I absolutely like the connection to every breath you take. So, every vow you break, every claim you stake, I'll be watching you. This has been traditionally thought of as a creepy male stalker song, but gentle reader, please email this to all the civil servants in your life.
The state is a creepy male stalker and much worse. What are your recommendations?
I have a reading list on this subject, including a fascinating article about how AMLCFT failed on anti-terrorism worldwide. So, gentle reader, please go to the show notes and I'm going to give you a bunch of articles on this subject. It's a great field. It's well worth doing.
Best show notes in the world, best show in the world. Like, subscribe, share. Thank you.
Cut.
Why should I cut? I am surveilling. Go inside.
Ban that tuck
I'll-
Indian state never cuts.
I'll walk with you.
Clearly, you are civil society.
So Ajay's phone beeped in the starting of the show.
Okay.
And now Ajay's watch beeped at the ending of the show.
क्या कर रहा भाई?
Right profile ले रहा हूँ. Left ले रहा था इतने time से.
Right profile ले रहा है. Right profile है.
Fun
सही
show.
profile.
Yeah, very fun.
Vaishnav, fun show.
Yes.
Have you ever thought about privacy and surveillance?
These
you
guys
going to
are
play
just
Lal Bihari
becoming
Mritak?
mastikhor boys now.
Are you going to play Lal Bihari
Nothing
Mritak?
Yes.
দেখো একটা কথা আমি তোমাদের বলে দিই কি তুমি সার্ভেলেন্স কোথায় করো গুজরাটে করো আহমেদাবাদে করো but don't you dare do surveillance in Shantiniketan and I'll tell you why. It is not because we don't want to be seen. Oh, come into our bedrooms, come into our chambers, come into our boudoirs, but it is not a problem with us and all the unspeakable things we do. It is a question of what will happen to you when you see what we are doing, when you see true Bengali fun, the voluptuous bodies, the hungry artist log. You will not be able to take it. Do you understand me? It will destroy your lives. You will dream at night of the fun that I have. So don't surveil me, motherfucker.
Push the barley.